Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Tonight's presentation is going to look at the role of the chair in grassroots football clubs. It's part of an ongoing series we're doing this summer for club support, covering both kind of administration and management of the club, but also going through those key roles and key administrators that are required within the FA structure for grassroots football clubs, and trying to provide a bit more context and understanding around what is required by that roles. Hoping that the session this evening lasts about 40 minutes or so. But as I said, if there's any questions, please feel free to throw them out at me as we go, and I'll try and pick them up as we go through. Session this evening is kind of broken down into, I think, three key roles. The first is I'm going to look at the role itself. And part of that will be the chair's role in long-term strategy, the day-to-day management of the club, and then just representing the club both within the football and wider community. Then going to take a look at FA technology and what tools are out there to help you with running the club and stay on top of everything that may be happening. And then at the end, as I said before, happy to do a bit of a Q&A session and provide any help and support as necessary. Starting off then, what is the role of a chair when it comes to grassroots football? Throughout this evening, I'm going to try to refer to chair in the gender neutral. If I do slip and do chairman, obviously I hope you accept that and acknowledge that does obviously refer to chairwomen as well. We'll try to use the gender neutral term, although you will see it across FA platforms typically still referred to as chairman. But the club chair is ultimately responsible for the running of the club and setting its long-term strategy and direction. In addition to that, the chair also has the casting vote on any matters affecting the club within its internal committee structures. So what this means is that we would hope and expect to see that the club chair is active across all different aspects of the club's operations and are building strong relationships with stakeholders both within the club, so other committee members, team managers, players, depending on the size of the club, parents for youth clubs and so forth, but also key external stakeholders, so building relationships with other clubs, with the leagues, with the county FA, perhaps with the FA, depending on the size and status of the club, and also within the wider community, located depending on what your location is. So in effect, as the chair, you kind of need to know the club inside out and have that high level understanding of what operations are going on, how the club is functioning, but also what that long-term vision and strategy is going to be. There's an awful lot of overlap in this with the role and kind of the job description of a club secretary, and I will come on to that later because it is slightly different, and those two key roles really have to work in coordination with each other and side by side in order to effectively run the club. So coming into a bit more detail then around that, the way that the chair has to lead the long-term strategy of a club and its growth. So the chair really sets and leads the long-term direction. We would expect the chair to make an assessment which, if any of these different categories that you should see on the screen right now, you want to aim for and achieve. It may be a case that you're not in a position to be able to do all of them at exactly the same time, so you need to prioritize different priorities, prioritize different aspects for your short, medium and long-term goals, and may not be able to go for everything immediately, particularly for clubs that may be just starting out in the process. And one of the challenges that we have as a governing body and in trying to put these kinds of presentations together is there's a massive diversity and variation in the size of our clubs, going from your one-team pub clubs or your small youth clubs that maybe have a couple of teams and just starting out on that journey, all the way up to your large national league teams or national league clubs that are overseeing perhaps 50 odd teams across different ages, formats, genders and so forth. So wherever you are along that journey, effectively it's the role of the chair to assess where you are, where you hope to be and how you're going to get there. So ideally, the chair should have a clear vision of how they want to progress the club over the next 1, 3 or 5 years. Vast majority of clubs' elections will be done on an annual basis. However, I think it's also fair to say that 99 times out of 100, there's continuity in those roles. It's rare for there to be a contested leadership election unless it is someone stepping down and actually there's 2 or 3 candidates that want to step up and replace them. By and large, though, you as a chair, you should be looking 1, 3, and 5 years ahead so that you know the direction of the club and what that long-term development looks like. Within that, you want to be aware of what opportunities and funding are available for expanding teams and growing the club. So we're looking at what the impact is going to be growth-wise in terms of new teams, player recruitment, looking at how you're recruiting players, where you're getting them from, and what you're going to charge them from a financial aspect, both in terms of annual membership fees, but also weekly match subs. Or actually, it may be getting to the point where you're at a level where you've got to consider what you may, as a club, may need to pay your players in terms of appearance fees. You also want to look at that long-term vision of promotion through the National League system or the women's pyramid, depending on where your club is. And it's important within that to note as well that as you start progressing through those levels, and particularly that kind of cusp between grassroots and outside the National League system into steps 5 and 6, and then jumping up from step 5 to step 4, certainly, promotion isn't just solely based on performance on the pitch and league position. There's a lot of requirements that go into it in terms of off the pitch governance structures, facilities, floodlights, tenure of grounds, and so forth. So it's important to be aware, if you are looking to make that jump in the next 3 or 5 years, whatever it may be, that as the chair, you're aware of what those requirements are and how you can help the club progress through those. Also within that is an awareness of deadlines, because a lot of those don't actually sit within the natural season to season cycle. Quite a lot of the times, if you are looking to progress through the National League system, the deadlines for application are the end of the calendar year, and it's then partly based on successfully making an application, having the requirements, and then meeting the league finishing positions. You may also be looking at England Football Accreditation, which, for those of you who aren't aware, is the new branding and new name for Charter Standard. Whereas we used to have adult or youth clubs, development clubs, community clubs in Charter Standard, we now have 1, 2, and 3-star England Football Accreditation. So again, you may be looking at either achieving accreditation for the first time or progressing through those and looking to become 2 or 3-star. So it's important to be aware of the different requirements in that and how you might be able to achieve those within the time frame you set yourself. Finally, in there, I put down around legal structure. And this is something as a county FA we are becoming particularly keen to support our clubs with and make sure that clubs have the correct structure for the size, the operations, and the challenges or development plans that you may be facing over the next few years. The vast majority of our clubs, and it's also the default, is that you will be unincorporated associations, which means you're a membership body, you elect officers, and the club as an organisation is not a legal entity in its own right. But it may well be, as you look to expand, as you take on long-term contracts, as you potentially employ staff, take on long-term facility hires or leases, that actually it's important to protect the club and to protect the volunteers that you look to change the legal structure and become either an incorporated business, a charity, or a community amateur sports club. And as the chair, again, it's important that you're aware what your current structure is, what legal requirements may come along with that, particularly if you are registered in terms of providing AGM minutes and annual finances to Companies House. But also if you are looking to change what the requirements and timeframes around that may be. Now, the one thing I would say looking through this as well, and I'm conscious that a lot of the stuff I've talked about is towards the higher end as you're going through National League system and changes to your legal structure. But if we take it back kind of more towards the beginning of a club's journey or towards a community youth club or community adult club, growth a lot of the time is driven by ambitious coaches, let's say, who want to bring in new players, want to create new teams, want to enter them in new tournaments, go overseas, host tournaments and so forth, which is all absolutely fantastic. But a lot of times that does bring with it a fair amount of financial risk to the club as well. And it's important to make sure that there is a clear structure and decision-making process within the club for approval on these kinds of decisions. As I said, each team will incur financial commitments. If you start a new team, you've got a load of new kit you've got to buy, you've got additional registration fees, insurance fees, and so forth. And it's important that you don't outgrow your means. So there should be an approval process in place for the creation of new teams, entry into tournaments, changing leagues, and so forth, which ultimately should be led by yourselves as the chair, because you've got that broad understanding of the club, its financial situation, and the long-term vision or development plan. You want to make sure everything is working towards that shared end goal. Looking then towards the strategic leadership and the funding and development opportunities that may be available, we'd expect the chair to be the one that's kind of on top of these kind of matters and really leading the club interest and involvement in commercial partnerships with external bodies, but also awareness of FA and county FA grants. So part of that means that as a chair, you will need to have an ability to at least understand financial accounts, management's accounts and budgeting and so forth. I'm not saying that we would expect chairs to be management accountants, chartered accountants and so forth, but actually just that awareness to look at the financial situation, make an assessment, make a decision, and a long-term development plan is key to that. And part of that will also then help support decision-making skills, so the ability and appropriate use of that knowledge and experience to make informed decisions for the benefits of the organisation. Through the commercial partnerships and looking to really extend that outward-facing external relationship, as you can imagine, there's a large amount of networking skills required, ability to promote and sell the club, get your foot in the door and kind of initiate some of those conversations with potential external partners, and make sure that the commercial partners fit with the goal and the ethos and the, to quote Steph, who ran a session on Thursday evening, the branding of the club. From a county FA and an FA point of view, then, we will send out the information on a regular basis of any grants that come in to us. Quite a few of those will then have stipulations attached to them around longer term requirements. So it may well be it's a grant to help support the growth of women's football within a club, and there will be requirements to have a women's team across multiple years. So again, as the chair leading that process, leading the applications for those grants, it's important that you're then aware of any longer term or residual obligations to be able to guarantee that funding in the future. Moving away then from the long-term vision towards the day-to-day management of the club. And ultimately, the chair of the board is responsible for the leadership of the club management committee, or the CMC. Again, that means a huge new skill set required around leading, influencing and mediating meetings, and making sure that they are effectively conducted in an efficient, effective and focused manner, which for anyone who's ever tried to corral a meeting of 10 or 12 people will note that is actually no mean feat and is quite a unique skill set to have. In addition to that, you're responsible for that ongoing compliance with the legal responsibilities I've mentioned earlier. So it may well be making sure that you are providing reports to Companies House, to your members through annual general meetings, making sure that you are updating them around financial strategy long-term development strategy, but also annual financial accounts and so forth. Some of that will also be required by the county FA through our affiliation process. And then ultimately, the chair is responsible for the behaviour of those within the club. So that includes making sure there's compliance with safeguarding regulations. You are the top of the tree, you're the one that's ultimately responsible for that. But also then you may be internally called in to mediate or resolve complaints and disputes between members. So that could be between players, between coaches, between parents, between any of the above effectively. And that is where we would look to see the chair really taking a leadership role on that, take responsibility and accountability for any issues that they have been in the club and making sure that there is a successful resolution to that, and looking at that long-term security and reputation of the club. So just to kind of rattle through then, when clubs will quite often come to us looking for support if particularly the chair is changing because an experienced chair may be stepping away. And we do have a kind of a role profile for it that's been provided by the FA. I'm just going to rattle through kind of the list of requirements or the list of attributes that we tend to ask for from a chair. And I'm hoping that this doesn't come across as shouldn't scare you. It shouldn't be stuff that makes you go, oh God, this role is bigger than expected, because it should be part of what you do naturally on a day-to-day basis through the role. But just, I think, go to highlight just the level of responsibility and the importance of the role of a chair within a club. So within that role, we'd be looking for key decision-making skills. As I said before, the appropriate use of knowledge and experience to make informed decisions that benefit the organisation. An ability to debate, discuss and challenge in a constructive manner. Excellent interpersonal skills with the ability to form strong, productive relationships, both internally and externally, to the benefit of the club. Excellent communication skills, both written and verbal. You're going to be corresponding on behalf of the club. You're going to be attending meetings. You're going to be chairing and leading meetings. So it's important to have those communication skills. The ability to act and speak tactfully and diplomatically. And as I mentioned before, the ability to chair meetings effectively and efficiently. As I said, that shouldn't come as a surprise. It shouldn't be anything that I'm sure it's nothing that you don't already do naturally as part of your day-to-day running of the club, but it just goes to show the level of leadership that is really required, even within a grassroots community sports club, to be able to make sure that it is run effectively. So I've mentioned a couple of times now a responsibility of the club chair to represent the club externally. Now, within football bodies, that could be attending county FA or league meetings. Could include FA meetings as well, depending on the size of the club, and particularly our large community clubs, the real kind of influential and keystone community organisations may well be asked to attend FA meetings or meetings with the Football Foundation, local governments and other stakeholders. But equally, when it comes down to county FA and league meetings, that's going to be the more likely type of meeting you'd be called to attend. And part of that is an obligation on behalf of the club to attend those meetings to help with the decision-making process, both at the county FA and the league. So it may be a case that you're voting on matters which could concern the club. So that could be changes to league rules, changes to the constitution or the size or the structure of a league, admitting new members into that league, which could impact the club financially, because suddenly you might be playing more fixtures or travelling further afield for games and so forth. And then attending county FA AGMs, the equivalent for us. And again, that helps us with our own internal governance, holds us to account to make sure that we're still acting in the best interest of our grassroots and community clubs. It's worth noting on these that at both a league and a county FA level, the membership is based on the club, and then a club enters one or more teams. So what tends to happen is, even in the larger leagues, they will probably ask for a senior club official to attend their AGM or management meetings, and that is to then represent all teams within the club. Reason for that is that, again, you don't get bogged down into having the blinkers of a team manager who may only be voting in the best interest of his specific team. But as a senior club officer, you would have that wider appreciation for what the impact is going to be, both for yourselves and indeed for other clubs through that process. So take, for example, East Berks Football Alliance or the Milton Keynes and District Development League, both two massive youth leagues, 600 or 700 teams entered into it, but actually what individual clubs within that could be entering 10 or 15 teams across different age groups. So they would have one vote on behalf of the club and would need someone attending those meetings who represents the interests of all those different 15 or 20 teams, the different age groups, and understands the impact of the decision makers. Part of the responsibility with representing the club as well with football bodies is providing information and acting on requests for information or action as may be needed. Now, from a county FA point of view, Again, 9 times out of 10, we're probably going to go to the secretary as our first point of call. And I'll come on to the reasons behind that in a little while. However, if we're not able to get to the secretary, we'll probably reach to yourselves as the chairs and as that senior point of contact and senior official that should be able to both be aware of what's happened within the club, but also use your influence within the club to support our goals. Types of occasions that we'd be doing that would be if we've had a disciplinary incident. Let's say a match has been abandoned because of a fight between two teams. Unfortunately, it happens. We tend to go to both clubs and ask for their observations and their account of what happened. So in those cases, we'd normally go to the secretary. If after a week or so the secretary hasn't come back to us, we might go to yourselves as the chair and say, can you help provide us with this information and an account of what happened? Equally, when it comes to safeguarding, that's an absolute massive priority for us, as I'm sure everybody can appreciate. And so we have a requirement to hold clubs to account to make sure that all of your volunteers have gone through the appropriate DBS checks, safeguarding training and so forth. When someone perhaps has a DBS check that just expires, as happens every 3 years ago, we'll come to the secretary or the club welfare officer and ask them to action that. And again, if they can't, we'll escalate that to yourselves as the chair with the ultimate responsibility for the organisation and ask you to assist us in taking action internally. Generally, we won't try to involve you in the day-to-day correspondence with the club. And as I said, it's kind of being there if we feel we need to escalate it within the organisation. Another aspect where we may ask you to meet with us, though, will be if we are doing safeguarding reviews, which we do on a kind of a random basis every season. Combination, previously it's normally been going in person and trying to meet parents, coaches, players, club officers at a training session. But we're increasingly trying to do those remotely through COVID by doing what we call desktop reviews of the information that's available on the club website and on social media and so forth. Once we've done that, we'll look to meet with the club chair, welfare officer and secretary, provide some feedback and see how we can better support you. So those are the kind of instances where we as a county will come to yourselves and ask for your involvement in something that we may be investigating or looking to support the club with going forward. Outside of football then, it's likely as the club chair that you would be asked to represent the club in the local community. So that will be in developing relationships, perhaps with commercial providers, sponsors, other sporting organisations, local facility providers, local government council, parish councils, district councils, town councils and so forth. And it's using your level of seniority as an opportunity then to influence those bodies to support the club, to support the wider football community. And as with everything we've mentioned before, both in terms of county FA and the leagues going to you, it's that wider appreciation and understanding of both the immediate health and status of the club and the long-term development plans that we will call, and perhaps local partners will call on the chair to support them with those goals. Now, I've mentioned before the role of the club secretary and how key that is, both in terms for us as a county, but also for yourselves as club chairs. So just want to touch quickly on what we see the role of the club secretary being and how it differs from yourself. So the club secretary is the primary administrator of the club and that main point of contact for people both within and outside the club on just about every aspect of their activities. So much like the chair, we would expect them to be aware of pretty much of all operations that are going on, but actually we probably expect the secretary to have a bit more of the detail. They're sort of the operational lead, the one that is handling the administration, handling the paperwork, and really able to channel information or pull in other people as they need it. The secretary sitting above them has a slightly more perhaps long-term vision, wouldn't necessarily expect you to be bogged down in the day-to-day details, almost like the chair of a business versus the chief executive or chief executive versus a department head. But equally, we would expect you to be able to rely on the secretary for that detail as and when you needed it. So you should be able to call on them for any essential information of the club at any time to support you with your decision making. Equally, the secretary would expect to be able to call on you for support or for longer term or for that longer term vision for what they may be doing on a day-to-day basis. Our relationship with the secretary then is the club secretary remains the primary point of contact for almost all of our communication, and we then see it as their role to pass that communication out to other people within the club as may be needed. So we'll go to them with disciplinary information or queries, safeguarding information and queries, the regular kind of marketing and communications that we have, updates from the FA, COVID updates and so forth, will all get channeled to the secretary, with the expectation that the secretary then passes it on to the safeguarding lead, the COVID lead, whoever it may be within the club. Part of that is probably protection of us as much as anything. We have 600 clubs that affiliate season on season, and by going to that one point of contact, we're not having to rely on knowing, okay, well, actually it's John at this club that does COVID, but if I need to go to safeguarding, I actually got to go to Jane. If I need to go to discipline, it's got to be Bob. If I need to go for a facility or a grounds query, actually I need to go to David. We know that we can send the relevant information to the club secretary and they can help manage it internally to provide that information back to us as we may need it. And again, we would see yourselves as chairs being able to have a similar kind of relationship with them, that actually they would be able to support you with getting your communication and requests for information within the club on that day-to-day basis. Before I head on to the next session, were there any questions just around those kind of aspects of the role? That's really how we see the role shaping for chairs, both in terms of that long-term vision, the day-to-day management, and that relationship with the county, with the secretary, with leagues and so forth. I'm going to move on to the second section in a moment, which looks at FA technologies and FA support and other kinds of support that as the county we provide. So if you did have any questions around the role, this may be the best time for that. Okay, can't see anything, so I will head on to the next section then. So I'm going to talk a little bit around the FA infrastructure and what technology, particularly the FA, provides to help you with administering and running the club. Now, you may have seen this graphic before. This is a spider diagram, or spider's web, I don't know the best way of calling it, but of the FA's Grassroots digital ecosystem, as they call it, and where all the information comes in. I'm not going to go through it in huge amounts of detail, but I want to show to you the range of platforms that are out there to help with different aspects of running the club, whether that is fixtures, whether it is as running a team, helping promote the club in the wider community, running your kind of Wildcats or Just Play events if you're fortunate enough to do that. And then really the one thing I do want to talk about is that the heart and center of that is the whole game system, which is the central dashboard out of which everything else effectively functions. So the whole game system, there's a couple of aspects to that. There's what we call the back end, a CRM system that we as the county use, that is the national database that gives us pretty much all the detail about everybody taking part in football. The forward-facing side of that, then I'll come on to in a second and do a demonstration of, and that is whole game system in its traditional form, and then the new club and competition portals, which have come out earlier this year and are currently being used to do player registration and an increasing number of other functions or reporting functions for the club. Between those two systems, you will be able to manage and view discipline, club affiliation, safeguarding qualifications, player registrations, manage your player suspensions and so forth. So really that's the heart and soul of running it as a club level. Full time then and match day work together for team managers around fixtures, and also through match day you have the ability to digitize your payment systems. There's a partnership between the FA and PayPal, where through Matchday you can actually effectively bill and receive money from players for their annual and match day subscriptions. And then the whole game system also sends information into the FA's new Find Football platform, which gives you the opportunity to promote your club outside of the kind of the football ecosystem for new players that may be wanting to come in, may have just moved to the area and want to get involved in football. And I'll come into some demonstrations of that shortly. So if my technology is working, if I pull this up, you should now be able to see the whole game dashboard. So I just want to run through the key information that's available for you on here and where to look. And again, what I've done is I've shown you the view purely as a chair. If you are also the secretary, you'll have additional functionality that will appear on this, or you'll be able to do additional aspects around data input and administration of discipline in particular. But the chair's role in isolation with no other roles against your individual fan just gives you that top level information again. So you'll be able to see the affiliation number and status, key contact details for the club, if there's any, and then if there's any finance outstanding. Coming down the left-hand side, you've got various tabs. Some of these will take you through to the new portals, so I'm not going to click on those ones just now, but I was going to show you the discipline side, and this will continue to be managed through whole game system for the next season, certainly. Now, as a chair, you will be able to go into this and you'll be able to see a season-on-season disciplinary summary. So you'll be able to see any outstanding or current cases that haven't been paid and acknowledged, and also get that snapshot of what your discipline is like as the season. Now, that's important for being able to both make sure that your players are behaving themselves, and it may well be that if you're beginning to see a large number of sending us off, you might want to take action internally to try to protect the reputation of the club and make sure that the players aren't incurring unnecessary fines and so forth. And it's also important to monitor, because as different types of offences accumulate over the season, as a club, you may end up incurring additional fines from the FA. If you're interested in that kind of information, we ran a session a couple of weeks ago on financial planning and management, which goes into that in a lot more detail. So I'd recommend checking that out on our YouTube channel. The other aspect I was going to show you in this part of the portal was around finances. You have the ability to click and to pay the finances. So this, as you want to as the chair, but you'll also be able to see outstanding invoices and invoices for the season. With any luck, you've got a treasurer or a secretary that will be doing the payments for you. But again, you may just want to check this on a periodic basis, and in particular, make sure that you haven't got outstanding invoices that are leading to teams and players being suspended. And the way you'll see that is if you pick up late payment invoices. Now, late payment invoices or late response invoices are where the club secretary or discipline officer or whoever's managing the process on a day-to-day basis misses a deadline for either acknowledging a case or making the payment on it. So again, if you find that you're beginning to pick up a lot of late invoices, these are, to put it bluntly, completely avoidable by having good administration. So it may be a case that if you start seeing those clocking up on a regular basis, that you need to have a conversation with your secretary or with your treasurer to understand, is there a problem with the finances? Is there a problem with getting money back from players? Or is there a problem with them remembering to access and update the whole game system? So what we don't want is the situation we've had in the past, where actually over the course of a season, a club have ended up picking up a couple of £100 in late fees, which would be completely avoidable if they had been on top of their day-to-day administration through the platform. So from a club chair point of view, those are probably the two key things you'd be looking for in whole game. You do also have the ability to update your club officials, club and team officials through here. And that's just a very simple process of clicking add official. And you might want to do that just to make sure that if there are changes to the secretary in particular, that you go through and you make that change. Or if there are changes to team officials, you can do that as well throughout the season if you want to. Moving over then into the club portal. A lot of you, I'm sure, will have starting to become familiar with this as part of the player registration process at the moment. So I'm not going to go through that right now, other than to say you can see the status and the list of all of your registered players through here. But I wanted to look at some of these other aspects. So over the last week, 2 new tabs have become functional, and that is the Teams tab here and the Officials tab. At the moment, this is read-only, so you can't make any changes to it. But again, as a club officer and as a club chair, it's a great way for you to be able to check who's completed what out of the mandatory safeguarding requirements for those key roles. If I now come up onto the My Club section, this is where you'll be able to see the key information, key contact details for the club, and also whether that information is public. Now, if you click on Make Organization Details Public here, the individual that's listed as the contact, their details will appear on the FA's Find Football search engine. And this is really where we are directing people, if they come to us, which happens quite regularly, saying, just moved to the area, I'm a 36-year-old man looking to get involved in veterans football in Abingdon. Are there any teams around? What we can do is we will now direct players to this platform and say, go on to Find Football, put in your personal details, put in what type of football you're interested in playing, when you're available, put in your postcode and how far you're happy to travel. And it will then provide them with a list of clubs and contact details that are actively recruiting players. So if you're not currently on here, really encourage you to make sure that you do make those details public, and so you can start attracting those players. You can also use this section then to update information around your sponsors. If you've got any partnerships with other linked organizations, so other clubs, perhaps if you're a youth club, but you've got an agreed partnership with an adult club that helps you achieve the old community charter standard, the new 3-star accreditation. You can also update your public social media platforms and links that will then be made publicly available through FA websites and applications. And then you can also list your legal structure. Again, this is just for information only, but actually we'd really encourage clubs to use it because it helps us understand what the grassroots football landscape looks like in bucks and bucks. How many of our clubs are charities, how many are casks, how many are businesses, and how many remain unincorporated members clubs, and what's the impact of that on the local community. Over the next 6 to 18 months, more and more functionality is going to get rolled out through this new platform. So we're going to effectively transfer all of the club administration onto the club portal. So definitely recommend getting familiar with it. That way, as and when new things and features come out, you'll be aware of them and able to take advantage as soon as they come. Okay, good. Jump back to the presentation now. Want to talk around other FA support, county FA support and resources that we can offer for our clubs. Certainly, we've got a lot of informal support. So we've got a database of online resources that actually we're going to review over the course of this year to try and make sure that we are providing clubs with the most relevant information possible in an easy and accessible manner. So that if you do have any queries, we've actually got the resources there on the website almost as self-serve answers. That's not to discourage you from coming to us if you do have any queries, but we also recognise that we, with both the County FA working on standard business hours and a lot of our members being volunteers that have day jobs, it's important actually for us to have information available outside of working hours as much as anything. We'd like to think we also offer prompt customer support, and we have internal targets and hold the members of our team accountable to achieving a response rate of for 90% of our queries within about 2 working days, and look to resolve it within 4 working days. So hopefully that means you know that if you come to us with an issue on a Monday, we'll get back to you within 24 or 48 hours and look to resolve that by the end of the week. We also then do regular CPD and information sessions, whether that's through webinars such as this, where we're looking at different aspects of running a club, whether it's coaching CPD sessions, monthly safeguarding meetings, various platforms we offer across the season. A lot of those have moved and will remain online. I think as much as anything that's actually helping volunteers, because you're no longer having to drive to Abingdon to attend a course and spend more time in the car than you do at a session. But we are looking to support that with perhaps with getting out on the road, because we've missed being able to see clubs and really kind of interact face to face and get our boots on the ground and come out and see you guys. So what we're looking to do is trying to have a bit of a blended approach over the next season, where we're out and about, but we're also providing online support for those people who maybe aren't able to travel, or it's less convenient for them to come out and join us wherever we are in person. From a club governance point of view, we've also recently launched what we call a club governance self-assessments tool. This has 7 different categories and about 40 odd criteria, I would say, that gives an opportunity as a club chair or as a senior officer within a club to sit and look at the health and status of the club, really. Each of those 40 or so criteria are RAG rated. We've got 3 different definitions or 3 different descriptions. You go through and you complete or mark which one best reflects the status in your club, and it then gives you effectively a RAG rating at the end of it, or a risk assessment that says, really strong on these, you might want to take a look at these aspects, and then these ones are areas we would strongly recommend that you address. The goal with this is to try to make sure that clubs are as strong as possible and sustainable. And I know it's dry, and I apologize for that as much as I can, but at the same time, it is a very valuable tool and something we do really recommend clubs look to go through, particularly if you are in a position where you're looking to grow over the next few years. This will hopefully give you the strongest footing possible to do that. If you do go through that and find there's a few reds and you do want to work with us on a governance development plan, then please contact myself, and I'm more than happy to sit down with the club officers, the committee as a whole, or just perhaps the chair and the secretary, and discuss it in more detail and see how we can support you get to the level and the status that you want to be. One resource that may then help you with that is the FA's Guide to Club Structures. So through that club portal, the screen I just showed you a couple of minutes ago, if you go to My Club and that Legal Structures tab, you'll see here there is a section where you can download a PDF document of club structures. This has been revamped over the last year or so. Previous document was about 5 years old. So it's as up to date as we have at the moment, and it really takes you through the pros and cons of all the different governance structures, and how to progress from one to another if you wish. So if you are looking at becoming a charity or incorporating as a business in the next 12 to 24 months, if you want to explore community amateur sports club status and see whether there's any legal or financial benefits from that, this is the document to kind of start you off with. If you then get stuck with the technology, there is also a fantastic new tech support help desk that the FA have established, which has got online solutions, guides, videos, walkthroughs for all of those digital platforms I identified earlier. We're aware that there are some challenges and difficulties with the player registration at the moment, and the FA are using this platform as well to provide regular updates to clubs around the status of those known issues. So workarounds for them, updates on when the fixes will be in place, and so forth. So if you do want to access that, this is where I'm hoping that link, then the link will hopefully be coming in the chat. And that, I believe, is the end of the induction. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to stay around. If there are any questions, please feel free. You can drop them in the chat. You're welcome to unmute and ask. But if you did want to head off at this point, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. I hope it's been useful. I hope it hasn't scared you. I hope it hasn't been anything that you weren't expecting, or I'm sure it wasn't anything you weren't already doing on a practical level. As I said, if you do want any support, whether it's with the governance structures, whether it's with the technology, or what the role involves, then please feel free to reach out to us at any time. More than happy to support in any way we can.